Greetings and welcome. We are in 303 and we turn now to Mr. Conrad's Unstoppable volume, lesson number 6, the best part of the story. And we're going to be turning now to focus on the idea of a success story. Many of the stories and chapters in Mr. Conrad's volume involve these success stories. Stories about individuals who overcame at tremendous odds. We're going to hear about one of those right now. Notice in your journals for lesson 6, the idea, your success story is being written right now. Let's take a look at what he has to say. Again, follow along as we read to improve your reading. Yes? After Donnie won his wrestling match, I truly wanted to thank him. He taught all of us an unforgettable lesson that night. Knowing Donnie was the world's biggest Denver Bronco fan, I asked him if he wanted to watch them on Sunday. At first, Donnie said, "I'll be over," thinking I was inviting him over to my house where together we watched many of the Bronco games. "No, Donnie, you're not coming over to my house this Sunday. How would you like to go see the Broncos live and in person?" I asked. For the first time since I'd known him, Donnie was speechless. He just kept nodding his head. Yes, yes, yes. Next, I had to round up some tickets. No easy feat in Colorado. Thanks to the help of another teacher who was also inspired that day, we rounded up 3 tickets. That Sunday, before we jumped in the car, Donnie and I made our weekly bet on the winner of the game. Donnie, of course, would always choose the Broncos, just to fire him up. I would always take the opponent. This week, that was the Indianapolis Colts. Since we were actually going to the game, I told Donnie we have to have a special bet. We agreed that should the Broncos win, I'd walk home. If the Broncos lost, Donnie would do the walking. Donnie never been to Denver before, so he didn't realize the walk home was over 250 miles. It didn't matter. The bet was just for fun. And Donnie wasn't thinking about going home. He was too excited to get to Mile High Stadium. We arrived in Denver an hour early. My wife Vicky took advantage of that extra hour by doing what she loves best, shopping. As Donnie and I walked through the mall, he asked, "What's that?" "That's an escalator, Don." "What do?" "It takes you up to the 2nd floor," I told him. "Let's go," he said. So we rode the escalator up and down several times that afternoon. Donnie got such a kick out of riding that escalator for the first time. He laughed the whole time. We could pause here and just point out the heart of a child. This is what Wordsworth will say in his famous poem, "My heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky." Right, the heart of a child. As for myself, I was filled with anxiety, knowing that Vicky, his wife, had been recently diagnosed with the, quote, "the field of dreams shopping syndrome." "What's that?" I asked the doctor. The doctor told me that she hears this little voice inside of her head that whispers, "If you spend it, more will come." Ha ha. When we finally arrived at Mile High Stadium, and Donnie walked through the cold cement corridors, he had no clue that what he watched every Sunday on television would look so much bigger and better in person. When he stepped through the corridor and out into the stadium, he just stood there and stared in disbelief. Any of us that have had this experience will immediately identify, right, what this means. To be in an experience like this is almost overwhelming, right? Remarkable. Paratroopers jumped from an airplane, streaming orange and blue smoke. The Denver Broncos ran out onto the field. The crowd was electric. The noise was incredible, off the charts. I thought I saw Donnie pinching himself. This was John Elway's first year as Denver's pro quarterback. Everyone had high expectations since the Broncos had paid millions for him. However, John hadn't proved his worth to this point. The game before this, they had beaten a playoff team, and the fans were sure their million-dollar man had arrived. The Colts, on the other hand, had not won a game. This one was going to be a blowout. Sure enough, at the end of the 3rd quarter, the score was 19-0. Broncos losing, amazingly, just like Donnie's wrestling match. The fans were booing the Broncos. They chanted, "No way, Elway, Kubiak, Kubiak." It's amazing to read this, obviously, given that we're reading it in 2016, and the Denver Broncos now, of course, with Kubiak as their head coach, chanting for the backup quarterback, Gary Kubiak. Donnie turned to me at the start of the 4th quarter, visibly upset and crying. I thought he was crying because the fans were booing his Broncos and yelling, "No way, Elway." The only thing Donnie said was, "You make me walk?" The poor guy was worried about walking home. I really felt bad for Donnie and at a loss for words. I told him, "A deal is a deal and a bet is a bet." He started crying more. "Come on, Broncos, at least score a touchdown," I was thinking to myself. Donnie hadn't gotten to cheer since the opening introductions. Elway threw a touchdown at the start of the 4th quarter, making the score 7-19, but the fans still called for Kubiak. Halfway through the 4th quarter, the defense intercepted a pass and ran it back for a score, 14-19. That's when we both experienced that Rocky Mountain Thunder at Mile High Stadium. I was moving, but I wasn't moving. The stadium was shaking. Any of us that have experienced this know this is an amazing feeling. With less than 2 minutes left in the game, Elway found Gerald Wilhite in the end zone. Touchdown. The Broncos won, 21-19. Pandemonium ensued afterwards. People were going nuts, pushing, yelling, screaming, Broncos, Broncos. Even on the bus ride back to where we'd parked the car, it was crazy. Donnie was like a sponge. He was soaking it all in. I thanked God. I couldn't have written a better script to the ending of the game. It was just like Donnie's wrestling match. Don't quit. Never give up. Fill your cup. It was just like how he lived his life. But I knew what was coming. Donnie was smart. He didn't say a word until after we went out for dinner. Not until after he had finished his meal that I had paid for. Didn't he mention our bet? Deal is a deal and a bet is a bet, he reminded me. Yeah, but Donnie, humana, I stammered. Then Donnie used a saying against me that I had taught him. I hate it when that happens. He said, are you a man of your word or simply the words of a man? Ouch, that hurt. You're right, Donnie, I'm walking home, I said. But I'm taking the car keys with me unless we strike a deal where I can chauffeur you back to town. Needless to say, we struck a deal. I'm embarrassed to say that Donnie graduated from high school unable to read. I believe if you tell a kid he can't do something, or worse, that he believes he can't do something, then he won't. He won't. He don't. It goes back to lesson 4, break the chains. Those chains held Donnie down his whole life. Until one night, after graduating from high school, Donnie was washing dishes at the Holiday Inn when it hit him. I don't want to do this anymore, he thought to himself. Just one problem stood in his way of getting another job. He couldn't read a job application. So now, for the first time in his life, Donnie understood the importance of learning to read. I should point here and point out that Frederick Douglass, the great emancipated slave, who writes in My Bondage and My Freedom, talks about how reading is the way to emancipate the slave, to free the slave. If you're uneducated, it's like you are in slavery. There are things you cannot do if you cannot read. Very interesting. Donnie enrolled himself at CNCC, our local community college, to learn how to read. Before he signed up, he asked me, what do you think? You think I can learn to read? I said, of course I do, Donnie, but what's really important is what do you think? I learned to read, is all he said. Eventually, Donnie mastered reading so well, hooked on phonics, you might say, that the time had come for what many students in our school said was the most awesome thing they had ever witnessed. At an all-school assembly, at the very school he graduated from, unable to read, I told Donnie's story, Fill Your Cup, to the crowd. I told them of all the obstacles Donnie had to overcome, including the recent death of his mother, the mom he had made the spice rack for. I told him how dying from cancer she no longer recognized Donnie and how he said he wished he would have told her he loved her more. I told them about the 2 kids Donnie's sister had left with Donnie's mother to raise and how Donnie was now left with the task of raising the 2 kids. I ended by telling how Donnie wanted to be a teacher, but he didn't know how to get the degree. Ladies and gentlemen, I proudly proclaimed, I have a special guest I'd like to introduce. He's a very dear friend of mine and a most inspirational teacher. Please welcome the one and only Donnie McLesley. 800 people stood on their feet and blasted Donnie with the loudest standing ovation I've ever heard. It went on and on. Please sit down, everyone, I said. That's not why Donnie came here today. He's not here to relish his past. That's not his style. This, I held up a piece of paper, this is why Donnie came here today. I handed the piece of paper over to Donnie and said, read it, Donnie. Donnie read the poem, If You Think You Can, by Dr. Dennis Waitley. Instantly, I could see everyone in the crowd getting choked up. As Donnie slowly and methodically read each word, I could see more and more people wiping their eyes. Halfway through the poem, Donnie stopped before reading the line about being an Oakland Raider. There was no way the world's greatest Bronco fan was going to say that out loud. Suddenly, in front of 800 people, I had a situation. You know the words Oakland Raider? I asked Donnie. Donnie said, yes, I know the words. I know say them. The crowd was in hysterics. They were laughing and crying at the same time. So I told Donnie to just change the words. Although it didn't rhyme, the crowd exploded with cheers after Donnie said, you can be a Denver Bronco. Donnie finished the poem by saying, and I believe I am unstoppable. I stood there with my arm around Donnie the whole time as he read the poem, and I watched 800 people, many of them crying their eyes out. When he finished, I said, If Donnie can stand before you today and prove he's not retarded after the experts claimed that he was, if Donnie can read to you and go home and raise 2 kids, in other words, if Donnie can fill his cup, I challenge you to fill yours. At that point, I turned to Donnie and presented him with a framed document that read, Teacher of Inspiration. Donnie got his degree. Sitting in the middle section of the auditorium, 15 rows back, was the teacher that called to tell me they had put Donnie in my class, the one who said, Donnie can't read. We were all there that day to witness Donnie adding another key to his keychain. How many keys are on your keychain? And then I'd like to read just below it, the unstoppable you believes. If you think you can or think you can't, either way, you're right. Let's point out, as we finish, the idea of attitude as being important. Many of us have heard this. It became for us probably a cliche of a certain kind. Let's talk about really quickly the notion of making up your mind to do something. That we will call will. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. For example, I'm going to graduate. We would call that desire, will. But what we're going to emphasize is not will, not desire, but what we will call sustained will. Now what are we talking about? Anyone can say in a moment of emotion, I will do X, Y, Z. Anyone can do that. Anyone can say that. The challenge is sustained will. Day after day, week after week, month after month. To graduate from high school is a project of many, many months, years. And some of us know people who, for example, had to even take extra years to graduate. An amazing accomplishment when it's finally done. The challenge for us is not will. The challenge for us is sustained will. How do you sustain the energy to want to finish what you start? It's a great question, isn't it? That's a great question. And the answer, of course, is to remember daily what one really wants. What is it that you want? Part, of course, of the use of our journals is to try to remind us, what is it that we really care about? Well, there you go. An introduction now, lesson chapter 6 from Mr. Conrad's Unstoppable. Thank you.